Good evening and welcome to Beware of Spoilers. I am Adam. So today we're here to talk about Scream 6, which is coming out a little over a year after the last Scream movie. Um, Now, this trailer doesn't exactly grab me, and in fairness, the trailer for Scream 5 didn't exactly grab me either. It's not something that I was like, oh, let me, get amped up to see this. It wasn't until I had seen the original Scream, which for frame of reference again, Scream came out in 1996. I would have been 2 years old when that movie came out, so it's not exactly something that was at the forefront of my knowledge at the time, considering I was an infant or a toddler, 2-year-olds are toddlers. So I was a baby, so I didn't see it then. And then horror movies were never really my jam. I didn't watch Scream until recently, and then I watched it. And I was like, oh shit, that's not terrible. I like how they're playing with the tropes and all of that. So when Scream 5 came out and I saw it in theaters, I was like, all right, I liked what it was doing. I thought this is interesting. I like this cast. I think the cast gets along great together. I understand what they were doing with the whole like Ryan Johnson made stab 8 and that got this angry fan going, and so the bad guy was this guy who was a member of the fandom menace, and I was like, all right, I appreciate all of this. I think this is pretty good. Um, this movie I have a few red flags about in terms of quality. Number one, I think it's telling that Nev Campbell didn't come back. Not telling about quality, but telling about them continuing with the movie and not willing to give her a good contract. Um, I think that that's kind of telling. Like as of recording this, because what I did was I recorded all of these pre-thoughts in a bulk. Um, so I haven't yet seen as of recording this, which could change. I don't know if I'm gonna have time to see it between now and release, but um, I have not yet seen any of the movies with Hayden Panettiere, so I don't know if she's necessarily good. I played Kingdom Hearts and she was great as Kyrie, and I'm familiar with her in Heroes. And I think she was also in that country Nashville, that country music show that's like Empire. So I'm not like, and I know that she's kind of a franchise mainstay, but be that as it may, we'll like move on. Also, I'm not a huge fan of the fact that this movie is out 14 months after the last one, um, especially considering they weren't shot back to back. That's something that I'm not 100% in on. I also don't know how well it's going to translate to a big city, um, or anything like that. I don't know how well this movie's going to translate settings in that way, considering how much of the two movies I have seen, the town being a setting is a big part of it. It'd be like if they made a Halloween movie not set in Haddonfield, it'd feel a little weird. I think so. I think it's just kind of something that they need to work on. Where I think this will land, I feel like this is a movie that, based on having not read any reviews or seen the movie or anything like that, and based on what I know going into it, I feel like this movie's gonna end up at a 2 or a 3. Or it'd be a low 3, where it's like, wait for streaming. I don't think this movie's gonna do anything that's like you have to get out and see it in a theater immediately. I think it's gonna settle at a 3, possibly a 2, depending on how bad it is. Where it's like when this movie hits Paramount Plus, maybe wait for that, and only watch it if you already have Paramount Plus. Like, don't go out of your way to get it. Um, that's where I think it's going to be. We will see after the movie, which again, after the noise, we'll do the usual. First part will be a spoiler-free review. After that will be a spoiler-filled review. So we'll be back after we see the movie. Okay, so now we went back to the old system, and I'm gonna address this real quick because it's a point of contention. Well, with one guy in the comments. This is the system we do. Talk about the movie before we see it, expectations, thoughts on the franchise, all that kind of crap. And then we come back from seeing the movie, and then we talk about what the movie's going to be, what the movie was, having seen it, and how we feel about it. With a spoiler-filled, sometimes spoiler-free, then spoiler-filled discussion. Now, this was supposed to happen. Well, first off, let's address the issue. The guy was like, "Hey, get to the review." It's like, well, you don't understand how this works, I guess. But whatever. So, whatever. Now I was gonna see this last week, but I got sick. Um, so now I'm no longer sick. So now I saw the movie, and in terms of the rating, I'm tied between a 3 and a 4. And I think that it only becomes a 4 if you care about the franchise. If you don't care about Scream, it's definitely a 3. There's nothing about the movie that's particularly a spectacle or particularly deep in terms of plot that kind of indicates you need to rush out and see it right now. Like, if you're, like, it's not even like if you're a horror fan, run out and see it right now, because it's not a particularly scary movie. Some of the gore is great, and I'll give it that. This movie does have some of the best gore that we've seen in the Scream franchise, and that's not to say that the others were bad, it's just this by comparison is the best. With some particularly gruesome and particularly painful looking kills. Um, I think that it does a great job with showing that kind of brutality. But this one gets a little weird. Scream is a franchise about taking the tropes of horror and turning them on their head and using knowing the tropes of horror to navigate through the story. That's what the entire thing's about. And the most recent one kind of took it and turned it into a bigger, like, okay, so now it's more about movies in general. Because where we are now with horror movies, we don't have slashers the same way we did in 96, even, when the original Scream came out. That's not to say that slashers were prevalent then. At that point, slashers had started to fall by the wayside. But at this point, we didn't have slashers the same way that even now, we don't have them. So looking at that, putting it through that lens, if we were to do it, Scream would take on a more paranormal approach. Because I think that's kind of where horror is now. We get a lot of paranormal. Like, there are 7 fucking exorcism movies coming out this year. Because that's kind of where we are. Zombies and exorcisms. And the Scream franchise doesn't exactly lend itself to that. So unless there is going to be a Scream, like, zombie movie, it's not exactly something that's going to be big, for lack of a better word. Now, looking at where this movie is, it kind of stops doing that and kind of more is about, like, this is kind of the final stage of it, where it's like, okay, so we lampooned horror movies, we lampooned horror sequels, we lampooned horror, like, reboots, we've lampooned horror, like, the legacy sequels. So where do we go from here? And this movie's more about lampooning Scream itself. It's kind of a meta, like, postmodern kind of take on it in a weird way, where it's more about looking at the history of Scream as a franchise within that lens. And I'm not entirely sure if it works, and I feel like someone who has more of a nostalgic feel for the Scream franchise might have more success with this movie than I did, because I came late to Scream. I didn't see the first Scream until last year. I still haven't watched 2 and 3. I have no interest. I watched Scream 5 in theaters last year, and then I watched Scream 4 last week. And I was like, alright, I don't know why Kirby's such a big fucking deal. Like, I don't understand how she became a fan favorite. She doesn't really do too much. And it's like, look, I kind of get where they're going with this. I kind of understand what the general thought process is and how this movie does. So, like, having the things where it's like, here's all the stuff from the past movies, I'm like, alright, I could see someone who cares about this a lot or loves this a lot having a lot of fun with it. But it's just not for me. In the same way that, like, Downton Abbey, the movie, is not ever going to be built for me because I never went into the show. And it's not something that I would be like, oh, well, it's not good because I don't like it. Well, it's like, well, you're not the target audience. And it feels weird to say that because I always talk about accessibility, where it's like we shouldn't have things that are designed for, for a niche audience. But at the same time, I think the niche audience, there's a difference between taking something and making the audience smaller, or taking something that has a broad audience and only servicing a small portion of it, and taking something that has a small audience and tailor making content to that audience, which is kind of what this is. If you're a Scream fan, you will find a lot to love in this movie. And I think that even people who like slasher horror will find a lot to love in this movie, because, again, it does have some good slasher action, it does have some cool, a lot of cool, like gore sequences and a few cool kills, which will make it worth the price of admission, especially if you go, that's what possibly makes it a 4 if you're a horror fan. It's definitely not a 5. It's definitely not a movie you have to see in 3D, or definitely not a movie you have to see, um, as quickly as possible. It's definitely something you can sleep on and wait. So it's a 4, but where it falls between a 3 and a 4 will depend greatly on how you feel about where it should be seen. Um, and I think that's kind of where it is. Like, if it's a movie, if you're a casual horror fan, I could see this falling more as a 3. If you're a more casual, or if you're a diehard, Scream fan, it's definitely more of a 4, probably a 5 at that point. Um, but look, I mean, like, I do love this cast. I that was one of the things. Like, yeah, the chemistry wasn't great in the first movie, and they do have the time to really get to know each other in between. And this new one does work a little bit better in that regard. And I think that, like, beyond that, like, Melissa Barrera, is that her name? And they really lucked out by having Jenna Ortega in from the beginning, because she got in before she blew up with Wednesday, and I think that really works in her favor here too, because she's great in the movie as well. The other two, whose names I'm forgetting, are also great. Um, and then, like, the returning cast is good. It's a little weird to have this without Nev Campbell. She was right to not come back if they weren't going to pay her the wage she deserved. But I mean, look, at this point, here's the issue that now arises with Nev Campbell coming back for another one. If this movie does a good amount of money without her, it proves the producers will take that as, oh, we were right to give her less money, because it proves the franchise works without her. Um, and I think she was kind of hoping that this movie wouldn't work, because then when they came back for Scream 7, they'd be like, here's a lot more money. And look, they if they want her back, they are going to have to do that, and they are going to have to back up the money truck, and they are going to have to actually invest in it. But I don't know if that's going to work out for them. Um, and I think the question is, what's the return on that? Do they make a good amount of money just from having Sidney Prescott back? Is that a big enough draw to add in more money than they already make on this one, where it made $44 million in its first weekend domestically on a $35 million budget? I mean, like, the question is, like, okay, so do we really need her to come back? And then the question is, 35 million. It's like, okay, so if she wants, like, even if she wants 5 million, it's like, you probably could have had her back and not had the headache of the bad publicity from not paying her due. When it's like the franchise is built on her back, it's kind of a weird situation all around. That, based on it doing 44 million, maybe didn't work out in her favor, which is a shame. The movie turned out fine, though. I mean, I think that's the other problem, is that the movie turned out fine, for lack of a better word. I mean, like, had the movie not been as good, and I think that this movie, for me, I liked 5 better, only because 5 is more macro, meta, for lack of a better word. It's more designed to lampoon all of Hollywood instead of specifically Scream, which I don't have the emotional attachment to. And I think that it did that very well. But that said, I think that this not working is not because of the lack of Sidney Prescott. I don't think it's just I don't have and from what I've heard from people who do like Scream, this is better than 5, especially when you get more toward the idea of um, what this franchise is as it goes on in movies, and how that's going to reflect, especially in future entries. Um, but yeah, in no way am I saying it's not worth a watch, and in no way am I saying it's not worth watching in a theater. Um, Especially if you are someone who likes well-made horror, and especially if you're someone who's into the more gory slasher, because I do that very well in this movie, and I think that that's the kind of thing that is kind of a selling point, where it is just the right amount of gross out, where it is going to have that desired effect. At the same time, it's maybe not a movie you got to rush out to see if you're not that person, or just wait for it to go to Paramount Plus in a few months if you're someone who wants to, who's mildly interested, but not super interested or invested enough to the point where you have to see it immediately. Um, but I think it's a good place to wrap up. Over on 30 Minute Reviews, Peter and I did the 300th episode where we ranked all the DC movies under the DCEU banner from Man of Steel up until Black Adam and Peacemaker. We did that over on 30 Minute Reviews. You go to 30minutereviews.com. You can see all the information about that. If you listen to Beware of Spoilers, as usual, we will have The Mandalorian tomorrow morning. As usual, we will have The Bad Batch the next day. I think there's no episode of The Flash tonight, so we'll have a new episode of The Flash up on Saturday. Plus, last week's I didn't do because I was sick. And Gotham Knights we'll be doing on Sunday. No episode of Exploring Hyperspace Lanes this week because Josie was very busy. We'll be coming back with it next week with Return of the Jedi. We'll be back with that next week. But Josie was very busy this week, so we couldn't meet up to record. And I feel like there was something else that I needed to talk about or address that's coming. Tomorrow we have Shazam, Fury of the Gods on Beware Spoilers. Possibly on Sunday, we will, or at some point next week, we'll be doing uh, Metroid Prime for the Switch. And we have two new series over on 30 Minute Reviews as well. We'll be discussing Outer Banks every Thursday. That might move to Friday because of tomorrow's discussion of Shazam. I got to record that. And we might have a new episode of. And I'm gonna be right after this. Actually, I'm gonna be recording the new episode of the backlog. I think I called it the back catalog files, something like that. I forgot what I called it exactly, but that's going to be on over there too, where we're going to talk about video games. We're talking about city skylines. So until our next episode, have a great rest of your week.